good. That was an interesting overview of what are the factors that affect grain prices. But in one of the U.S. reports, I read that in 2020, global wheat prices have also been sort of pulled. I am actually more or less quoting it, pulled higher in the towards the end, I suppose, of the year. Because of global oil seeds and feed grain prices. So feed grains you talked about, and but oil seeds prices also. So you have alluded to the relation a little bit, but can you just make it clear for people how food grain prices, are impacted, and where are these correlations that we read is in the news from time to time?
There, you're right. There is a significant correlation between in prices between products, and it arises from one simple fact, which is the area for land area available for cultivation is finite.
Correct.
And therefore, different commodities or different grains have to fight to get acreage.
Right.
And so if the price, to use an example, if the price of soybeans goes too high, then for the coming season, the farmers will have a greater incentive to plant soybeans than for any other product.
Right.
And therefore, the wheat acreage reduces. And therefore, unless the wheat prices move up in relation to soybeans prices or at an equilibrium level, that incentivizes the farmer to plant a certain amount of wheat or a certain amount of soybeans. And that's where the intra-commodity relationship comes in. So if soybeans prices go up, corn is not going to be left behind and wheat is not going to be left behind.
Right.
And then the supply and demand balance sheets determine how much of wheat or how much of a commodity is needed to meet demand for the next year. And that will create the price relationship and the equilibrium between different commodities.
Right. So acreage refers to on how many acres these crops are planted, right?
That's correct.
And you're saying that there is a competition for it, in the sense that, like, the farmer has the ability to choose, and he will choose based on whichever one. So which means that the lands are similar for
well, the lands are similar to the extent that, yes, each commodity needs a certain kind of soil type. It needs a certain external weather cycle. So you will typically find most of the acreage that gives you a good yield, meaning how many tons are produced per acre.
Right.
You will find it in a certain band, in a certain latitude band between most in the northern hemisphere and the flip side in the southern hemisphere.
Right. Which is why you talked about USA, Canada, and then across to East Europe, Ukraine, and places like that. That's what you are alluding to. Right? And then again, Australia, Brazil, Argentina. So those are the bands you're talking about now.
That's true. And as you go across, and as you go to the extremities, then either you get to equatorial or you get to polar in terms of weather patterns. And that is detrimental to any crops, or that gives you such low yield that it is economically not feasible to plant. You might have land acreage, but it makes no economic sense to plant crop there.
Right. Right. Okay. So something related to what we have been talking, and this also, popped up while I was researching for our discussion, and this is about Vietnam. We all, have seen Vietnam become from an, insignificant player to a major rice exporter and a player in the rice trade. But this is not about rice trade. This is the not the export side, but the import side. So, which probably I thought that we could ask you how it is related to some of the things that you have been talking so far in this section is that about a decade ago, Vietnam was importing only less than 2 million tons of corn,
Yeah,
but for the 2021 period, they said that it will be 12 million tons.
true.
So, what are the important developments that have happened in this country, Vietnam, that has caused this sevenfold increase, which is not a small thing?
Uh, there are a few factors. I think the most important factor is over the last decade, Vietnam as an economy has developed tremendously. Its industrial practices, its food consumption habits.
Mm-hmm.
As people get wealthier, the
Mm-hmm.
food consumption habits change. So they tend to consume a greater per capita meat.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to go on to higher classes of meat like red meat, white meat, uh, and there is also in Vietnam there is a huge element of aquaculture. Vietnam is one of the largest aquaculture nations in the world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and therefore all these factors combined together. So, for example, the
Mm.
food habits changed. They started eating more bread.
Mm.
They started eating more meat on a per capita basis.
Right.
The consumption went up in
Mm.
absolute terms.
Mm.
And there is another factor which also doesn't get much publicity, and people don't like to talk about it, but it is a reality, which is a certain amount of what gets imported into Vietnam, especially in the north near Hanoi, in that area in the North
Mm.
Vietnam, ends up in southern China. It walks across the border.
Right. 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 Okay.
And therefore, today I would estimate one third of what goes into Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
actually ends up in southern China.
Okay.
So these are some of the factors. I think in general, the economy has been growing and food habits have been growing. People tend to eat better quality food, better protein sources, which
Which means
it
more
translates
meat,
in,
which means more
which
feed
means
grains
more,
and corns, right?
which means more imports of more requirement for corn.
Right. 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 Interesting. Interesting. Good. So, um, let's move on to sort of things that you have seen over the years, and this we had a good introduction to what's the lay of the land, to say, so to say. But let's move on to discuss how in your own career and experience, how you've seen the industry change, right? So what are the major events that have happened in the in the history of grain business over the last few decades, right? um, Maybe the top five, whatever are important for people to know, right?
I think the main there have been quite a few changes really, and I think changes that have kept us in pace with the requirements, with the demand requirements. I think the biggest one major change has been information transparency,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but that has a bigger impact on price volatility rather than alter the structural nature of supply and demand.
Right.
Information
Right.
transparency has taken away the opportunity for what uh, we call as price arbitrage.
Correct. So when in our you and I as traders in our earlier days of the career, price arbitrage could be essentially information arbitrage, right?
That's
You
correct.
now you're saying that over the period of time, with technology, with communication,
That's
that
disappeared
is
completely.
good.
Then I think the other factor has been seed research.
Mm-hmm.
You had developments and seed research and agronomy practices that have made seeds less resistant to plant
Mm-hmm.
diseases, as well as improve yields.
Mm.
So while you have, the pace of growth of acreage is complemented by an improvement in yield. These two factors combined enables you to produce much more food for the rest of the world to keep in pace with the rising population. Uh, I think the other major development has been vertical integration. Trading, it's a very loose term in the sense that it's no longer about buying cheap and selling expensive. Today, trading is really about vertical integration and supply chain management. And then you as a company or as an individual or as an entrepreneur defining what your own strengths are, and there are specific niches that are available within the industry that you can be a part of and where you can add value. So the keywords are vertical integration, value addition, supply chain. These are the biggest changes that we've seen. We've also seen changes in storage practices, in storage systems, in bulk material handling systems that enables the participants to reduce losses through handling or through improper storage. We've seen major changes in management of growing cycles. For example, today there is extensive use of GPS data to map crops, the size of crops, so you get enough of a head start to make corrective changes. And I think through GPS data, even through satellite feed data, these are developments, we will talk about it as we go down, but these are big changes.
Interesting set of changes. So what you have, if I were to put them in major buckets, so what you're saying is there have been significant changes on the production side.
Yeah.
Right? Growing from all the way from the seeds, agricultural practices, which is the production side, processing side has changed, and on the supply chain configurations, you're talking about the storage and transportation. But not only these, what you're saying is that precision agriculture is also an important technological advancement which is making an impact, right?
That's true.
So you alluded to using GPS data to plant seeds. So I guess this is one of the examples that I read in this area, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in US, some of those giant farm equipments can plant a seed now in a particular place and store that data, and 6 months later when they plant it again, they can be like whatever 6 centimeter off or whatever, some like that, or even shorter. I probably those numbers would have changed. That close they can be precise, right? So is that kind of a thing that you're talking about here?
To a certain extent, yes, but it starts from one stage backwards. And I will risk getting into a slightly technical part because that's the only way to explain it.
No, this is technological advancement. So I think, listeners will benefit from some technical, discussion here.
Yeah. So for instance, via GPS data and satellite feed, even before the crop is planted, one can assess in a certain part of a country as to what the subsoil moisture content in the soil, and therefore would you plant, those decisions, would you plant in that area or would you not plant in that area? And then you have sophisticated algorithmic models that take that data, analyze the data, and draw conclusions as to what your potential yields can be with that specific input, and the impact on production, impact on prices. So it starts from that stage onwards, and that just gives you, it's a hint of the level of precision and sophistication that the industry has moved to and will continue to move forward. And you're right, in terms of these farm equipment that actually plant the saplings, that's more relevant for rice, but for beans and for soybeans and for corn products, you just leave a certain residue from the previous crop. So it's not as if it is a fresh planting. But it just tells you that the technological advancements are coming at such a rapid pace, and they're
Mhm.
getting so precision oriented that
Mhm.
you can probably define today in a particular field which part of the field has what kind of yield and what kind of quality of the commodity that is growing there. It's
Wow.
grown to that
So within a
sophisticated level.
within a field, so even a particular landowner's property can be
Yes,
analyzed.
you can assess that the western part is in much better shape than the eastern part. So it gets as micro as that, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it getting even more sophisticated or precise that you could map it down to a few square meters.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's move the thing a little bit forward along the supply. Uh, what are the important consolidations that are taking place in the industry, and what are their impacts?
I think we've touched on a few of them. I would, I would, I would probably use those same things. For example, we talked of material handling systems. We talked of
Mhm.
storage and handling facilities. But I would also add to that, uh, bulk handling systems is probably the biggest area
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
has impacted the business.
Right.
And so you have today commodities because of the sheer size of the commodities. The bulk handling systems have become increasingly mechanized.
Mhm.
You can run 100,000 ton storage facility with less than 10 people
Mm, 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 mm.
and manage the entire input and outflow.
Right. So I wanted to take that forward to industry consolidation in the context of companies being acquired, are there vertical, horizontal, what kind of consolidations are taking place? Because you yourself, some of the things that you talked about, moving to a global companies, Chinese companies, and so on and so forth, they're all sort of hints of like who is buying who and so on. So could you talk more about those kinds of consolidations also, in addition to these?
Uh, well, the industry is quite oligopolistic in nature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the composition of the industry is you have, let's say, 5 or 6 major global players.
Mm.
Most of these global players who are vertically integrated all the way from farm, or maybe even fertilizer inputs to the farm, through production, through storage, through transformation from an origin to a destination,
Mm-hmm.
through storage systems in destination, through processing in the feed industry, through branding, and ultimately into retail. So there
Mm.
are 4 or 5 companies in the world that operate on an end-to-end model on a global scale.
Mm.
Most of them are in private hands.
Mm.
A few of them are public.
Mm.
Uh, then there is a second set of people, industry participants, who are what we call global niche players. So either
Mm-hmm.
they specialize in a particular geography, or
Mm-hmm.
they specialize in a particular product, or a
Okay.
combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
So these are, and you will have many such people. And
Mm.
obviously, size is also a function of cash resources. This is an
Right.
industry that needs a significant amount of bank funds or leverage or internal funds to operate.
Right. Right.
Working capital is the biggest food for the industry itself. Uh, Most of the bigger players are today more industrial than traders because of the nature of end-to-end vertical integration. You will find, and if I could take a few names, for instance, Cargill
Mm-hmm.
or ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. These
Mm-hmm.
two companies are more industrial than trading. quote
Right.
unquote. Yeah, please go
Right.
ahead.
No, you work for a cooperative, right? Which is unlike some of the companies that you named. And India has had Amul and other agri or dairy cooperatives. So my question is, across the globe, has the cooperative movement succeeded and grown in this industry, or has it been like the private sector giants that you talked about, and that then they are the ones who are dominating? How is it? Uh,
Um, I work for a France's largest agricultural cooperative,
mhm.
called Invivo.
Right.
Uh, and the nature of a cooperative, a farming cooperative, means that you're essentially inward looking, in the sense that the objective of a cooperative, in the true sense of the term, is to be able to market or merchandise the
Hmm.
production of its shareholders, of its constituent farmers, to the rest of the
Right.
world.
Right.
Now, when Invivo started, this was the original objective, but then significantly Invivo over the years has become very industrial, having
Mhm.
gone into a global feed production, into agricultural technology, where technology itself has become a business, in addition to its traditional merchandising function for wheat and barley, which is what is the
Mm,
principal grains grown in France. It
mm,
also has extended, diversified into other products like corn and soybean meal or protein-rich vegetable meals, simply because it's part of a portfolio diversification,
mm,
and all the commodities are interlinked.
mhm.
If you are in the wheat business or in the barley business, you need to know what's happening in other products too.
Right. 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 So for
And
the reasons
in
we discussed before, yeah.
yes, we haven't seen very many co-ops uh, being in the trade as Invivo is
Right.
beyond
Okay.
its own countries. So you have cooperatives that are very country specific. For example, you have one in Argentina who has the same function of marketing the produce of its shareholders and constituents.
Hmm.
You have similar setups in Japan, but they restrict themselves to that activity. Unlike us, who have slightly moved forward and have become a bit more industrial.
Hmm. Hmm.
So today we are in, as an example, the company Invivo as a group is much more industrial than trading oriented, without forgetting its core function
Hmm.
of why it was brought into existence. And Invivo today has two-thirds of its operations and staff worldwide, and only one-third in France.
Okay.
Uh, Now, so the net result is yes. We don't see much role for the co-ops beyond their own individual countries, unless they specifically have a strategy of extending their arms worldwide. Now, some may
True.
decide to do that, others may not,
True.
and that's
True.
their
True.
prerogative.
So we have looked at the industry structure, and let's look walk further down the chain. So on the consumer end of the business, what changes are taking place, and which will have an impact on the industry structure? What do you see there, or what have you observed there?
On the consumer side, actually, not much
Mm-hmm.
in terms of changes. Now, the demand side of the equation purely is a function of population growth and
Right.
demographics. It also is a function of uh, the economic well-being and the economic strength of a country and of its population that enables it to afford better quality carbohydrate sources, better quality food sources in general, which
But
in most
that would change consumer side of the industry, right?
for sure. And we have
The
that's
last
that
part,
is
the
that's what
economic.
we have, that's what we have seen over the last 10 years. And we discussed briefly about Vietnam,
Right.
how that change is translated into a change in import profile. And there are many other
Similar story in
examples.
China also, right? Similar story in China before.
Well, China is slightly different. China is more for strategic reasons rather than purely commercial driven. A lot of what goes into China, yes. For instance, in soybeans, China, 2/3 of the world trade in soybeans is China. It's a unidirectional flow from North and South America into China. And likewise, so that is purely for a consumer end.
Otherwise, they were one of the major producers themselves, right?
No, they've never been major producers. So to put some numbers and to put it into context, China's soybean production has remained fairly static at around 15 million tons a year. Whereas its imports have grown from when I started in the business from about 7-8 million tons a year to almost 100 million tons a year today. Whereas it's different on the corn, on the maize, where China is a big producer, major producer, about 175 million tons of production, but also because of its population needs and recycling of strategic reserves, China, we expect them to become a structural importer. Now, when China comes in to import corn or import anything, it changes the whole dynamics of the equation because of its scale.
Correct.
And 2020, season 1920 is the first year that we've seen China buy maize, corn in a big way. And that is a part of replenishing stocks at a strategic level. So when China comes in, there's a bit of commercial, purely supply and demand driven angle, as well as a need for securing strategic storage. And I think that's one of the reasons we discussed this earlier in terms of industry changes, why China as a country decided to acquire two big companies in the industry, because it's a question of food security. It's a question of securing sources of food. When you grow to a certain size, then size itself becomes a limiting factor. It becomes a constraint. It's no longer an advantage. So it's like it plateaus off, and at a certain point, it starts off as a parabolic curve, and then it starts to quickly go downhill once you get to a certain stage. If you do not have, if you do not extend that supply chain or that food security chain backwards right to the origin. And that's what we saw from the Chinese government about 5 years ago.
Right. That's
and
interesting.
ours was one of the companies that they had acquired at that time.
That's true. You mentioned. Yeah. So since we went into China a little bit, just wanted to know if there was an interruption in the flow of thoughts or earlier you about the consumer end of the business. Is there anything point that we missed out when we started talking about China, or you're covered?
No, I think we've covered pretty much. There's more advancement or more changes on the supply side than on the consumer side. The consumer side has purely been a question of demand growth. And demographics.
So, are companies moving to produce other, manufactured agri-based end products because there are more consumptions from the Chinese, more consumptions from Vietnamese, and so on? That's what I was asking. So, but it's
all these
companies are becoming industrial. So, are they doing things further down the chain? That was my question.
You can become as industrial as you want, as your finances would permit you to be. And also whether you believe as a company that you have the necessary skill set and the strengths to be a participant in that end of the business. And so
some companies have processed, branded, gone into consumer marketing and so on, right?
That's fine. Yeah, that's true. You can decide. You could have the financial resources, but you could decide that I don't have the skill set, or even if I have the skill set, I believe that that part of the business is too saturated to derive any value for a new entrant.
Right. Fair point.
So I think, the one factor that I would also mention is that, we've seen on the consumer side, we've seen increasingly protectionist tendencies from different governments for their own internal political reasons. And these have come through imposition of duties, what we call phytosanitary requirements, which is protocols between different countries that allow or don't allow certain products to be imported.
Right. So tariff as well as non-tariff barriers.
Tariff as well as non-tariff barriers. We've seen that increasingly, and it continues to happen, and it will always be a factor. So these are the other factors that could influence changes on the consumer side, that the governments can themselves determine what to let in and what not to let in.
Thank you for joining us in yet another episode of Move Conversations. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the Move Conversations YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get notifications of new episodes. Thank you very much. Till I see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day.